Bryansk calling. Is it already a civil war or just a new step of escalation? From Beijing to Moscow, transiting Minsk. What is the real purpose of Lukashenko's visit to China? $2 million in new sanctions. What is the real voice of Ukrainians in America? And brand new scripts of blockbusters made by the Kremlin script writers in our StopFake review. Welcome to Spotlight Ukraine, the only program made by the Ukrainian journalists to the whole globe. Let's start.
NATO allies have agreed that Ukraine will become a member of our alliance.
I reiterate, they won't make it. We will press them down. With the head of China, we will try to outline new horizons for our cooperation. China is set up for joint efforts with Belarus to strengthen political and practical cooperation.
Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko and Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping signed a package of 16 documents that could facilitate the circumvention of Russian sanctions by channeling Chinese aid to Russia through Belarus. Is China selling weapons to Russia, or Lukashenko is just running from a sinking ship? Historical meeting made in China. Details in our next story.
The Chinese leadership has finally decided to try on the mantle of peacekeepers. Beijing has presented a so-called peace formula that would help end the Russian war in Ukraine. The formula consists of 12 points. Among them, respect for the sovereignty of all countries, cessation of hostilities, resumption of peace talks between Ukraine and Russia, and ensuring the safety of nuclear power plants. Ukraine immediately responded to this initiative.
It seems to me that this was not a peace plan of China, not a resolution, not a declaration, not an infrastructure for something. It seems to me that China has shown its thoughts on this. The question is, what follows the words? In times of war, we must understand that words are words. Everyone says something. The question is in the steps. Where do they lead? What is the result for us?
In the West, the Chinese peace formula has been criticized. For example, the chief European diplomat, Josep Borrell, said that it has rational points, but he also believes that it is not really a peace plan.
It is not really a peace plan and mostly reiterates well-known Chinese positions, some of which we share, while important ones are missing. Of course, we will analyze it, but it is already clear that the key problem is that it does not really distinguish the aggressor from the victim, putting the parties on the equal level.
U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Victoria Nuland commented on the Chinese peace formula as follows. If Xi Jinping can get Putin and his army out of Ukraine, I think we will all applaud him and give him an award. But does China really want peace in Ukraine? According to U.S. intelligence, the Chinese government is considering selling Russia heavy weapons and ammunition. However, Washington claims that Beijing has not yet made a final decision. Therefore, the White House administration strongly advises against making a mistake.
China can't have it both ways when it comes to the Russian aggression in Ukraine. It can't be putting forward peace proposals on the one hand, while actually feeding the flames of the fire that Russia has started with the other hand. So I hope that China will take what we said very seriously, but not only what we said, what many other countries around the world are saying, and refrain from any further consideration of materially supporting Russia in the war effort.
A meeting, or at least a conversation between President Volodymyr Zelensky and Chinese leader Xi Jinping could help to understand Beijing's real attitude toward Russia's war in Ukraine. However, the proposal of the Ukrainian leader was commented on in China in a very vague way.
China's position on the Ukrainian crisis is extremely clear and consistent. Our core interest is to promote peace talks and push forward a political solution to the crisis. We have always maintained communication with all relevant parties, including Ukraine.
The visit to China by self-proclaimed president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, adds fuel to the fire. According to official reports, his main goal is to hold bilateral meetings with the leadership of China and also to make a number of economic deals. However, many experts assume that, among other things, Lukashenko may act as a secret mediator between Moscow and Beijing. The European Union also wants to influence the situation. They are planning a visit of European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Charles Michel to China. It is supposed to take place in the first half of this year. However, the problem is that we need to act immediately. So will China help end Russia's war in Ukraine? This is a question of the true intentions of the Chinese leadership and time.
So my next guest of Spotlight Ukraine is the expert on U.S. foreign policy, Asia-Pacific security, U.S.-China military security, and Taiwan's defense, Mr. Liang-chih Evans Chen. Hello and welcome to Spotlight Ukraine.
Good to see you.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us today. So, some analysts claim that Lukashenko and Mr. Xi signed a package of 16 documents that could help recurvement the sanctions against Russia by channeling Chinese aid to the Russian Federation through Belarus. Do you think that China will take such a step against the West?
I think so. That's true. Well, the Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko just went to Beijing to visit Xi Jinping on March 1st. And I think that's a strong signal to see, Russia, Belarus, and China, these three parts, they are trying to stand together. So I think we also can look at, the meetings in Munich, Germany, in middle of February this year. And at that meeting, the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken of the United States, just, stressed that, China, you cannot supply any kind of military assistance to Russia. If you do that, you will encounter a very, very heavy, outcome by doing that. So I think the U.S. already has kind of intelligence to see China, Belarus, these two important strategic allies of Russia are trying to stay together and closer to help Moscow to recover or to re-attack Ukraine in the battlefield. So I'm pretty sure that definitely China is still standing aside of the position against U.S.-led democratic alliance in the war of Russia and the Ukraine. So definitely, I think China is, redeveloping, reorganizing its policy toward the situation.
So once again, let me clear it out. So you think that Belarus is going to be a new hub for China's help through Minsk to Moscow. Am I right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, and now let's talk a bit about the peace plan. So China presented the so-called peace plan to end the war in Ukraine, and it was approved in Moscow and Belarus, but not in the civilized world. Why did Beijing, after a year of war, decide to take the initiative, and who will listen to China and their so-called the peace plan?
Yeah, well, I think China is always learning to look at the situations in the battlefield in Ukraine. So let's go back to the 1 year ago I think, well, just right before, the start of the war, Putin just went to visit Xi in Beijing, and they, announced unlimited, no limit partnerships just right before the start of the war. So that shows that kind of, very strong relationships between Moscow and Beijing. But after the beginning of the war, it seems that, Moscow cannot do everything, cannot move very quickly. So I think China tends to, be hesitative to, the war in Ukraine. So I think Beijing is always learning. And at this moment, I think, well, Beijing definitely can figure out that, Moscow cannot, control, cannot progress too much, over the war. So probably, it would be much better to settle a line to stop the war. So I think that would be much better, to Beijing. So Xi Jinping or the CCP just announced that, okay, a peaceful or a peace settlement for, two sides of Ukraine and Russia. But on the other hand, I think Beijing is still trying to promote any kind of, assistance for Moscow, and also try to help, Putin can make a progress on the battlefield. And I also believe that, Putin also requests more assistance from either Belarus or China. So Beijing and Belarus, they try to, stay together and discuss or rediscuss any kind of their, assistance they can provide to Russia.
Yeah, but we've already mentioned the peaceful plan presented by China, and Russia and China call on Ukraine to sit down at the negotiating table and come to terms with the new territorial realities. In the event that Ukraine wins this war, are negotiations with the Kremlin necessary at all? And will there be someone to talk to at all?
That's very interesting. Definitely, I think Beijing is calculating that, well, if, Ukraine wins the war, definitely they still have to, conduct maybe a series of negotiations. So negotiation is still one option for Beijing. And then Beijing can announce its, any kind of contribution or devote, China can make to promote a peaceful agreement between two sides. So Beijing will still, gain something or gain kind of, contribution to the peace. So actually, I think, announcement of a peace agreement or settlement at this moment, to encourage or to initiate asking two sides, to go on the negotiation table. That would be still beneficial to Beijing.
Yeah, I see. Thank you. And my last question, I ask every guest of Spotlight Ukraine. So, do you believe that this war can be ended till the end of 2023?
Well, it's hard to say. I think it's hard to say. Well, over the past probably around two months or 2 months and a half, we cannot see too much progress of the war on both sides. So it seems kind of dilemma of both sides. They just stick on the east battlefield of Ukraine. But now the winter is coming to end and spring is coming. So both sides, especially I think Russia, tried to reset the battle, against Ukraine in the coming weeks. We also can see Russia definitely cannot, make the idea or make the plan into practice over the past years, and they also, need lots of assistance, either from Belarus or China. So, well, in the same way, Ukraine also needs lots of, military and economic assistance from the West. So it's hard to say. And I think the result will depend on, the coming battles in spring seasons. I think that's quite, critical to decide, which side will win the war or which side had much more advantage on the negotiation table.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being the guest of Spotlight Ukraine. Mr. Liang-chih Chen from Taipei, Taiwan was the guest right now, and we continue. How is Russia's propaganda targeting the Ukrainian media and new fakes about the newly transferred Leopard tanks in our traditional weekly review? This is Fake Check.
Ukrainians have become less frequently watching TV because of government propaganda, poll finds. The Kremlin media are spreading information that Ukrainians have started watching less television due to the alleged presence of propaganda there and the so-called media policy of the Kyiv regime. In such reports, the media refer to the results of a survey by the Rating Sociological Group.
So compared to November 2021, the share of television in a segment of information sources fell from 55 to 43%, while the share of social networks, including Telegram, increased from 11 to 41%. At the same time, it is noteworthy that YouTube's share has grown from 21 to 29%, while the internet news websites have noticeably sunk from 47 to 36%.
At the end of February, the Sociological Group did publish a comprehensive study, How the War Changed Me and the Country, Results of the Year, where the above issues are raised. However, it turned out that there are no such conclusions in the document. On the contrary, it is noted that, in general, trust in media has increased, but communication channels have changed.
There has been an increase in the media trust, but the main feature of wartime is a sharp change in the channels of communication and obtaining information by citizens. And if trust in national and local media increased, the frequency of consumption of their news content, on the contrary, decreased. National television from 55% to 43%, local from 11% to 7%. Internet pages also have some losses of the audience.
In the poll, there is no conclusion that it was the Ukrainian government's propaganda that became the main reason for the decline in the popularity of television among Ukrainians. The Russian media referred to this study and added to it the opinions of unnamed experts to create another fake. Employees of Military Acquisition Center in Mykolaiv compete. If you issue more draft notices, you rest in a cottage. Kremlin propaganda began to spread another fake about mobilization in Ukraine.
Mobilization events in Mykolaiv have turned into competition between employees of the Military Registration and Enlistment Office. The main prize for the champion is a weekend in the country cottage. While the residents are being taken away for slaughter, the employees of the Military Registration and Enlistment Office have a rest and arrange holidays.
Low-quality black and white photographs were used to create a fake. They are very difficult to verify. In addition, the men in the photo are not in uniform, and in general, the images look like automatically generated photos. Russian propaganda pays special attention to the topic of mobilization in Ukraine, trying to show that Ukraine allegedly fights to the last Ukrainian, suffers huge losses, and because of this is forced to call up even teenagers and women, as well as deport Ukrainians from abroad. Wagnerites destroy the first Leopard tank and its Polish-German crew. At the end of February, the Kremlin media and social media users began to spread information that fighters of the Wagner private military company managed to destroy the German Leopard tank in the east of Ukraine. The proof is the photo that accompanies the publication.
Today, on February 26, 2023, the fighters of the Wagner private military company destroyed the first Leopard tank near the village of Yagidne. The fighters were very surprised to see the German equipment that rolled into our positions.
StopFake project decided to verify the authenticity of the published photo after such a news release. It turned out that it was made long before the start of the full-scale Russian aggression against Ukraine. A reverse search of the photo on TNI program showed that this photo began to be actively distributed back in 2018. Then, as reported in various media, this tank belonging to the Turkish army was destroyed in Syria.
And now let's put some light on the latest fakes produced by the Kremlin propaganda machine with my next guest, the creative editor of StopFake, Ruslan Dynnichenko. Mr. Dynnichenko, I'm so pleased to see you again.
Hello.
So, how successful is Russian propaganda in discrediting the Ukrainian media, and who is this discredit aimed to?
Well, there are three target audiences for Russian disinformation and propaganda machine. First of all, it's Russian population, and this story with the tank targeted them. There are no success stories for Russian military in Ukraine for many, many months. So they create fake stories about their imaginary victories in Ukraine. And of course, Ukrainian population is number two priority for them. And they don't target Ukrainians with pro-Russian disinformation and propaganda. They try to find narratives that split our society, demotivate our people, to help our army, to go to the army, to defend our country. And number three priority for them is a Western audience. People in the European Union, the United States, those countries who helped us a lot with military equipment, financially, and so on and so on. So they're trying to persuade them that Ukrainian army is failing. They're trying to persuade them that Ukraine is a Nazi country. And of course, they try to persuade them that huge losses of Western supplied military equipment are here in Ukraine, and that a lot of military equipment goes through different channels to the European countries, to terrorists who might use them against Europeans or against Americans.
Thank you. And this is not the first time I've noticed that Russian propaganda is continuously trying to put the question of mobilization in Ukraine. Why do they do that?
Well, of course, they want to demotivate Ukrainians to fight for their countries, to go to the army. They want to make an impression that Ukraine is losing this battle and there is no point to go to the army. So that's why they create a lot of stories like this. And of course, sometimes they mix the truthful stories from Odessa or other regions. And sometimes they stage very similar stories. But again, I don't think they're very successful with this. And also they try to show their own population that Ukrainians don't want to fight, and the victory, Russian victory, is very close.
And now let's talk a bit about the fake about the Leopard tanks. So this is like an ideal script for James Cameron or Hollywood, but still. So in addition to the false information about the destruction of the Leopard tank, they also mentioned that the tank crew is consisting of the German and Polish soldiers. why Russian propaganda is increasingly mentioning that there are lots of foreign troops are involved in the war in Ukraine against Russia.
Well, it's another narrative, another popular narrative that Ukrainians don't want to fight, and that's why this conflict is, this war is conflict between NATO, the United States, and Russia.
Oh.
So, and this helped them to explain why there are no victories from their side. There are no victories for Russia because they have to deal not with Ukrainians. They promised to deal with Ukrainians and finish this so-called special operation in 3 days. But now the year has gone and there are no visual success for them. So they try to demonstrate that foreign fighters are operating German tanks, and there are a lot of foreign mercenaries fighting for Ukraine, not Ukrainians by themselves.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being the guest of Spotlight Ukraine, and see you next week with the new updates about the fakes made by the Russian propaganda. Thank you so much once again. Ruslan Dynichenko, the creative editor of StopFake, was the guest of Spotlight Ukraine. You're watching Spotlight Ukraine, and now let's talk about the situation at the front line. Russia's major offensive in Donetsk and Luhansk regions is not bringing the expected results. Because of this, the occupiers have once again thrown all their efforts to capture at least Bakhmut. The situation there is extremely difficult for the Ukrainian military. The enemies are also intensively attacking Avdiivka in the Donetsk region. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian defense has been stubbornly resisted on the front lines. According to the New York Times, Russia lost the largest tank battle of this war near Vuhledar, losing more than 130 combat vehicles. More about the situation at the front in our newest review.
The last surviving houses are burning down in Bakhmut. Heavy shelling continues day and night. The situation is getting worse for the Ukrainian military, who are heroically defending the city. The Russians are attacking from all directions. Enemy aircrafts are working intensively.
Brakes are working.
Regular Russian troops deployed to the Bakhmut area in early February did not achieve quick victories, so the most trained assault units of the Wagner Group were redeployed to attack the city.
The Wagnerian cannon fodder is still there. It was taken away for a while, but now it's back again, and they are pushing in all directions around Bakhmut as advanced groups with no right to go back. Regular troops come in after them.
According to Hanna Maler, Deputy Minister of Defense of Ukraine, additional military reinforcements have been sent to Bakhmut, and the decision to hold the city is strategic and not political one.
The military is holding this town based on rationality, that another line of defense will also face the same challenges that Bakhmut has today. The enemy will continue to intrude, and providing they are destroyed near Bakhmut, there is no point in changing the line of defense. The enemy cut 2 roads from which Bakhmut is supplied. These are the roads to Slavyansk and Konstantinivka, but there is also a road to Chasiv Yar through Khromove. If we can continue to supply our military with equipment and ammunition and take out the wounded, I think our troops will be able to hold this city.
Russians are also intensively attacking Avdiivka in Donetsk region. They are trying to surround the city from the north and south. They are not succeeding in advancing on other front lines. Although the occupiers are not sparing manpower and equipment, they will definitely feel one of the losses they suffered this week. On February 26, a Russian A-50U aircraft was severely damaged during a sabotage attack at the Belarusian Liang-chih airfield. The aircraft, equipped with a long-range radar detection and control system, was directing air attacks on Ukraine.
There are only 6 such aircrafts in Russia. This aircraft was used by the Russian Federation to direct the cruise missile attacks, to calculate our radar stations when they turn on and start emitting electromagnetic waves. And of course, it could defect our military jets taking off for combat missions. This has not blinded the Russian Air Force, but significantly degraded their capabilities.
According to the expert, despite the Russian offensive, Ukraine retains a tactical advantage in the fighting, and the enemy will not be able to turn the tide in the near future, as it has deployed 97% of its combat-ready army. Russia is also no longer able to influence the situation politically, even with nuclear threats. The office of the President of Ukraine is confident.
Fundamentally, the visit of Biden, the President of the United States, to Kyiv showed that the global player called the Russian Federation and Putin no longer exists. And so it doesn't matter what he is talking about. He doesn't have the resources to even increase the volume of military operation in Ukraine, let alone scale up to other countries, except for trying to make political coups, as Russia is currently planning in Moldova.
Mikhailo Podolyak is convinced that only Ukraine's accession to NATO can ensure stability and peace in Europe.
Russia has no chance to conventionally oppose NATO, and in general, I don't see any other alliance in the world that can oppose NATO when Ukraine is there, and NATO is utterly clear about this.
And now we're going to discuss the latest situation at the front line with my next guest of Spotlight Ukraine, Justin Crump, a defense, intelligence and security expert with the British military and CEO of Sibylline Limited, the intelligence consultancy. So hello and welcome.
Hello there.
So, Russia lost more troops in Ukraine than the USSR in all the wars since the World War II, and this was reported in the Center for Strategic and International Studies just lately. So, when and how the Kremlin could be stopped?
I mean, you're right. The death rate is appalling from this invasion so far. And Russian troops not only taking a lot of losses, but actually also their medical chain is very poor as well. So a lot of the people who are injured in the Russian military are dying quite quickly. When you compare that to the Ukrainian military, where far more people are getting medical care much more quickly, and it's saving more lives of soldiers. So not only is Russia suffering more due to action by Ukraine, they're losing more people due to their own lack of care. And that obviously is taking a huge toll. There is this story that Russia has so much manpower and these huge reserves of people, but we know that not to be true. And there will be a limit where these casualties are so high, it causes real discontent within Russia itself. But I don't think we're there yet. The Russian people obviously are still, to some extent, backing the president. They don't really have a choice. The ones that had a choice have left. And of course, we know that many people have left Russia out of fear at the moment. So there is a long way to go, I think, before these casualties would stop the war on their own. But it's certainly just one more of the Kremlin's many problems over a year into this invasion.
So you think that new waves of mobilization in Russia will continue?
I think Russia wants to think they can, but the last wave, they did generate a large number of people. We've seen that they're poorly trained. We've seen them performing badly, and the video just showed of the attacks in Volodar, where single small groups of vehicles attack over the same road again and again. That is not an impressive military performance. It's very wasteful of lives. And so they mobilized a lot. They had a lot of problems in training those people. They have a lot of problems equipping those people. They've managed it. And of course, the pressure is being felt on the front lines, particularly around Bakhmut and those areas where Russia is pushing forward slowly and steadily. But it's not a reserve they can just keep using. They found that already. I think the idea of further waves of hundreds of thousands of people in Russia coming to the front lines and being trained and ready is unlikely. They just can't keep doing this.
And do they have the plan B in this case?
I think they're already on plan Z. I don't think it's just plan B. I think they've gone, the original plan was 3 days to capture the key city, maybe 3 weeks to take the country, and we saw how that worked out for them, where the best part of a year after they expected to have taken Kyiv and Kharkiv and Odessa even, and of course, they're not doing well in that regard at all. They haven't even taken the Donbass, which I think remains their key objective. And I think the bare minimum that Putin can walk away with would be to take all of Donetsk, as well as all of Luhansk, and then declare at least some form of victory for Russia in that regard. So that's sort of almost the minimum he has to achieve. That's already, many plans down the road. And I think now this advance, desperately trying to take Bakhmut still 6-7 months on, advancing a field at a time, a wood at a time, a building at a time. That's the plan where they are now. And there's no sign that they'll be able to, even if they broke open the front lines against Ukraine, be able to advance quickly in the way that maybe they thought they could a year ago. It's just out of Russia's reach at this point, I think. So they're already on, many plans down the road. They don't have much more they can throw at this. All they can do is keep doing more of the same, as we see them do at a tactical level on the battlefield, and just keep doing that again and just hoping that eventually it works. And of course, Ukraine's just hoping to hold that off.
Thank you. Mr. Crump, you've probably heard the latest news, especially Russian mass media spreading the reports that a subversion and intelligence group has allegedly penetrated into the Bryansk region of Russia from the territory of Ukraine and is actively working there. But meanwhile, the Ukrainian authorities claim that this is a Russian provocation. What is that?
It's a very strange incident. I've been looking at it today, particularly on social media, and the pictures that are being shared. It doesn't make logical sense as a move by Ukraine to have done this. Obviously, it's the Russian claim. The pictures of the people doing this, they're covered in yellow armbands and yellow markings on their helmet to make it as clear as possible that they're Ukrainian uniforms. They're claiming to be Russian volunteers fighting for Ukraine. Of course, there are many of those. We know this. So that in itself isn't unusual. But it's a sort of provocative move that Ukraine has always avoided doing so far in the conflict. The operations that Ukraine has conducted inside Russia have been much smaller. They've tended to be things like the attack with a couple of helicopters against Belgorod that was sort of the first audacious pushback, I think, by Ukraine last year. And obviously these drone operations we've seen in the last week. It doesn't fit this pattern at all. It does, however, arguably fit Russia's pattern that, Ukraine is a terrorist state from Russia's point of view. Ukraine is carrying out attacks on civilians, taking civilians hostages in their homes. That's a very strange special forces operation compared to targeting an oil refinery in Belgorod or military bases. It's a very different target. It's a very different action. It doesn't make sense at the moment. So the whole thing is quite suspicious, and it certainly serves the Kremlin's interest, I'll be honest, in portraying Ukraine in the worst possible light at this point. It's remotely possible it is Ukrainian forces in some way, but it doesn't make any sense that it would be at this time, and certainly not working under the direction of the senior leadership in Ukraine. So at the moment, we're waiting to see, but it looks pretty suspicious.
Do you believe that can be the start of the civil war in Russia, as some experts and in Ukraine say? So from the inside, against Putin's regime?
We've certainly seen acts of resistance inside Russia, from small-scale things like torching of recruitment centers, potentially sabotage in other buildings, and escalating as far as acts, for example, people sabotaging military equipment. We've seen helicopters being sabotaged at air bases with people filming themselves doing that. And of course, outside Russia, but in Belarus, you've seen the drone footage from the airfield where the Russian airborne command and control aircraft are flying from. And there's a drone footage today of that drone flying around that airfield unimpeded, that it's clearly being flown by people locally. Railway attacks, of course, railway sabotage has been going on as well. So these acts have been continuing. I think the prospect of Russia disintegrating, full-scale civil war in Russia, I think it's some way away at the moment. It remains a possibility, and Putin is actually using that to scare the West into saying, well, of course, if this all crumbles, what are you going to be dealing with, if Russia fails? And of course, also speaking to his own people to say the West is trying to dismember Russia. They're trying to break Russia up. So again, that is a narrative that helps Putin in a way. It helps him try and get the West to stop supporting Ukraine. I don't think he'll ever be successful in that. But he can point it towards his own people and say, we should be scared. These are the things that are happening, and the country could crumble. We are under attack from NATO. We're under attack from the outside, which is not true. So I think there are definite signs of discontent. A long way to go in Russia. Of course, the Russian people are very controlled. They're used to being controlled. The media is controlled. The message is controlled. They know it. They're putting up with it. They don't know what else to do at this stage. And eventually, as we started, it could eventually get worse for them. But I think there's a way to go before it reaches that point of maybe widespread disobedience and resistance.
Yeah, just a new weapon in threatening people in Russia. And my last question, Mr. Crump. So do you believe that Ukraine can win this war till the end of 2023?
Yes. I think we don't know what the outcome of the war eventually looks like. I would say the fact that we're over a year on from the invasion by one of the world's top 3 militaries, as we thought at the time, against Ukraine, and a country that at the time wasn't even sure the invasion was coming, wasn't necessarily prepared to defend itself. If you remember those uncertain times in the week before the invasion and the month before the invasion, a year on, we're talking about whether Ukraine can win or not. That's already a victory, the fact that Ukraine is still in the fight. And of course, has recaptured huge swathes of territory that were lost to the Russians at the start, when the Russians had the advantage of organization and surprise, has pushed back in Kharkiv, has pushed back in the south, and is holding the line in the Donbass against very heavy pressure, has forced Russia to mobilize hundreds of thousands more people to replace losses. In no way is this a Russian victory at this point. So by default, Ukraine is effectively even winning by staying in the fight against Russia. And I think there's the opportunity for Russia to get pushed back further by Ukraine. I think, will we see the liberation of the Crimea? Will we see a liberation of southern Donetsk, southern Luhansk? That's the sort of area I think that's being much more debated as to what does an end look like, particularly from Western donors. Would we ever see an invasion of Russia itself? Those sorts of questions that people are looking at. And I think that's a much more grey area. But I think there's widespread support for Ukraine, at least to push Russia back to the borders that we saw before the invasion. Now, that may not be enough for everyone in Ukraine who would want to liberate the Crimea, maybe want to liberate southern Donbass. But I certainly think there's support for Ukraine pushing as far as we saw a year ago. And, that's not a bad place to end the conflict in many ways. But of course, will the conflict end? This is not a war that started last year, as your viewers well know. This is something that started in 2014 openly, and long before that, I think, quietly in long history here. So even if the fighting ends, is that the end of conflict with Russia? I think not, in the way we see it. So there's a long way to go in the future. But Ukraine, I think, can definitely achieve more on the battlefield this year with continued support, with continued resolve from the West. And we believe that will continue.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this conversation. And Slava Ukraini.
Yeah, man.
Thank you. That was Justin Crump, the CEO of Sibylline Limited, the intelligence consultancy, and he is convinced that Ukraine will win this war till the end of 2023. You're watching the Spotlight Ukraine, and we continue. Ukrainians in the U.S. marked a year of Russia's full-scale war by raising their voices at rallies in multiple states. In Washington, D.C., they were joined by the officials. The U.S. administration leads the world in allocating vital aid for war-torn Ukraine. The latest package was announced right before the anniversary. Voice of America's Misha Komodovsky reports from the American capital right now.
Exactly 1 year ago, Ukrainians took to the streets of Washington, D.C. to prevent a looming war. 1 year into Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, they're here again with a clear message: more weapons and more support for Kyiv.
Date of EU membership.
The U.S.-Ukrainian community joined people worldwide in condemning Moscow's aggression towards its neighbor, with $2 billion in weaponry for Kyiv and new sanctions against Russia aimed at undermining Moscow's ability to wage war. The United States marked the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. U.S. AID Administrator Samantha Power and Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S. Oksana Markarova addressed the rally at the Lincoln Memorial with words of gratitude to the Ukrainian people for their resilience.
To the engineers creating portable stoves to help the army stay warm, thank you. To the doctors leaving their day jobs to train troops in combat medicine, thank you. To the teachers in the classrooms and in the trenches, thank you. To the farmers on the front lines and those who continue to harvest their crops to feed not only Ukraine but the world, thank you. And to the ordinary Ukrainians risking their lives for their country's survival, independence, and democratic future, thank you.
365 days of horrible atrocities, war crimes, done to men, women, and children everywhere in Ukraine. 365 days of sorrow, losses, tragedies, and destruction. But we are not talking about that today. We are talking about 365 days of heroic, almost impossible fight. Ukrainians put defending our homes, loved ones, our independence, our dignity.
Not only Ukrainians participated in the rally. Some say we are Americans by birth, and currently we are all Ukrainians by choice.
We all feel Ukrainians today, and I think there is no world would be not worth living in if this part of the world would go back under Russia again. And I don't want that. I don't want to live in prison. I don't want my children to live in prison. And my friends' children. I just want Russia to fall apart. When first time I met my husband, he said, "What is your biggest dream?" What did I say?
The end of Russia.
That we're behind you 100%. Our hearts are out there for you. We're praying for you, and you're going to get through this, and you're going to be a free nation again.
I am Ukrainian, and it is my personal responsibility to be here and support all Ukrainians in Ukraine. It is very important for me that our land and our people feel that even here we do not forget but continue to help, think and believe in our victory.
Right after the rally by the Lincoln Memorial, the protesters marched all the way down to the White House.
Russia is a terrorist state. Russia is a terrorist state.
Protesters carried banners and posters mocking President Putin and Ukrainian flags as they marched to the Russian ambassador's residence, shouting, "Stop your genocide and shame on Russia."
Stop killing Ukrainian children! Stop raping Ukrainians!
Misha Komodovsky, VOA News for Spotlight Ukraine from Washington.
So thank you for your help and support, and stay united till Ukraine's victory. That was Spotlight Ukraine. Thanks for watching. Do not forget to subscribe on our YouTube channel, Espreso TV Spotlight Ukraine. See you next week, and до побачення.